Hey Next Economy Now listeners! Before we dive into today's episode, we have some exciting news to share. Our fall cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on September 19th, 2023, and we want you to join us. We designed the Next Economy MBA for entrepreneurs and change makers who are helping to create a world that works for all life. During this 9-month program, you'll learn practical skills on how to transform your organization into one that is just, equitable, and regenerative. Plus, you'll join an alumni community of over 500 impact leaders who are transforming organizations around the world. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro session with our facilitators. Plus, you can save 20% on tuition where you register before July 24th. Thanks for listening, and now, on to the show.
Welcome to the MBA Series. This is a special multi-part series within Next Economy Now. We are going to review the arc of the learning journey that is presented in the Next Economy MBA online course. We are open sourcing the content from our course and hope to share it in this shorter, bite-sized format. We are launching this series because we were asked to do it by listeners like you. We're also doing it because we are writing a book entitled The Next Economy MBA, Redesigning Business for the Benefit of All Life, which will be published on May 23rd, 2023 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. This is a sizable series. There will eventually be 18 podcast episodes of course content and 9 interviews with MBA alumni. We will be rotating every other week with our normal Next Economy Now interview format. We hope you enjoy it. Please reach out to us via our website, lifteconomy.com, with any comments, feedback, or requests. And now, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Next Economy Now MBA Special Series. We are on session number 21, Marketing 1, Approach and Messaging. Yay! And I'm Shawn Barry, a partner at Lift Economy, and I'm here with my wonderful colleague.
I'm Jeanette, and I'm the marketing lead at Lift Economy.
Jeanette Morelan. So great to have you here, Jeanette, especially because you're our marketing lead, and you get to tell us about marketing in the next economy. So I wanted to ask you, Jeanette, what is marketing in the next economy?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I feel like we probably should talk about why people have such an aversion to marketing in the business as usual economy in the first place. So I think when anyone thinks about marketing, they usually, first of all, think it's really annoying. The average American sees 3,000 ads per day. We're overwhelmed by things in our social media feed, emails in our inbox, ads that we're seeing on television. It's just a lot of noise, and it's really hard to break through. But I think even more insidious than that, I would say, is this idea that fundamentally business as usual marketing relies on this lens of scarcity. So there's not enough for all of us. You have to act fast to get this limited quantity item. Your life is not good enough without this certain product. And that kind of like underlying theme creates the sense that there's not enough. It creates silos between us. It creates competition between companies and industries where there doesn't necessarily have to be any. And so I think changing the way that we look at marketing really starts with this idea of framing it in a different context. So at Lyft and in our MBA program, we really see marketing less as trying to incentivize someone to buy or do something and more as relationship building. So it's this process that's really focused on listening, empathy, understanding someone's needs and understanding the opportunities where you might be able to connect to meet those needs, meeting people where they're at. It's really not manufacturing these desires. It's not manipulating people, but offering the solutions to basic needs. So it's a much more slow and thoughtful approach to marketing. But again, I think that we have the responsibility to do that, and particularly since it affects all of us. And even though we might use some of the same tools as business as usual marketing, so we might do things like audience research, we might have a website or social media, the ethics and the purpose and the intention behind it are really different. So, Shawn, I'm curious, as marketing is part of our overall curriculum, where do we see marketing fitting into an organization's overall business strategy?
Well, first I want to build on what you were saying, because I just noticed like having a relief in my body, and we get this from our participants in our training, right? When we talk about marketing and sales also, there's this kind of icky feeling, which you're describing, of like, we're all overwhelmed. And so there's this, I think people are already kind of like allergic to it, or they already have a resistance to it of, like you're saying, all the messaging and stuff. So there's this kind of ignorance or aversion. And so, reframing as relationship building and listening. There's almost like a calming and settling, and like, oh, you care about me, little me? So that just feels better, right? So I just want to acknowledge that, how that's landing in my body. And then in terms of the overall business strategy, very important, and we revisited this under our strategy section as we're moving through our curriculum, but we start with industry and market research, which we could say that's part of the listening of like what's going on out there. And then the strategic positioning. So how do you segment the market, and how do you design your product or service to really meet a known need in the community that you're targeting to serve? So it's really important to revisit that now before we go kind of deeper into the messaging, because if you're not solving a known need, right, for your community, it's going to be a lot harder to market and sell that. And that's what we see, right? Like nobody needs colored sugar water, right? Like how many people do you go around saying, I just need some water with color and sugar in it? Nobody says that, but you get marketed it like day in and day out all over the world, right? So if you're actually meeting a known need, especially in a self-evident way, where if you can see a product or service and the difference it's making in somebody's life, and you already know, I need one of those, I need some of that, or that's going to make my life easier, that changes the tenor and the work we have to do in marketing. Because if, again, if I'm trying to convince you really need sugar water to feel better about yourself, that's a lot more work for me than if you, I don't know, it's the other thing. Oh, maybe my herbal tea I'm drinking this morning. You're like, oh, wow, you get adaptogenic benefits from drinking your Tulsi tea. I want some too, right? There's a real actual benefit for that, rather than me trying to convince you that you're not enough unless you get that. So does that make sense?
Agree more. I couldn't agree more. I feel like sometimes people will think through like, oh, if I just have a great marketing strategy or social media campaign, you can do anything. But at the end of the day, people make decisions based on if it's solving their problem. And we can come with all these great ideas of what we think people need, but if we actually don't know or understand, and we'll get to this later in the conversation, that's a real uphill battle. So definitely tying it into strategy and overall business design resonated with me.
And results, right? So it's, I might think that you need this, but if it doesn't click for you and it doesn't work, then it's not right. So there's what we call is like an iterative design to strategy. It's not just your best idea and run with it. It's like test it, get feedback, test it, make it better. And then when you actually have really good product market fit, now we can move on to a marketing campaign, because we know this is creating value. We're getting enough signal from the market that this is really valuable. And now we want to share it with a wider group. So assuming, Jeanette, that we're there with our next economy company organization, we have a good product or service that's solving a known need. How do we approach our marketing strategy then?
That's a good question. So I would say that two things that we like to recommend when developing a marketing strategy would be, one, grounding it in reality, and two, as you mentioned, this iterative testing. So in terms of grounding in reality, I think it can be super overwhelming for folks, particularly if they're not well versed in marketing, to get overwhelmed by all the different kinds of things that you can do. Do we need to start a TikTok? What does our website need to look like? Do we need to have this huge newsletter list? But before you do any of that, I would invite you to take a deep breath and think about some of these fundamental questions. So, who's our audience? What problems do they have? What might they need from us? How could we help them solve that problem? How do we actually know that that's true? And something that we highly recommend doing is actual audience research and user testing. So if you have a concept that you're thinking about, let's say that you wanted to start an herbal tea company and maybe you've got a couple friends who are really into that. Maybe you go to the farmer's market and start chatting with people, but really getting to know them as human beings. What's going on in their lives? How do they make their purchasing decision? What do they value? What's important to them? What would make their lives easier if you were to offer a product? And in that way, you are kind of grounding it not in this, I have this great idea for a business and of course everyone's going to love it, but actually being responsive and adaptive to people's needs, which goes back to that strategy piece that you were saying earlier. This also takes a lot of weight off when you start to investigate how people get information or what lands with them. So maybe you have people who are interested in buying tea that aren't on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. So why would you spend time there? Maybe they really enjoy going to their local grocery store and they kind of see what's there. So maybe you would develop a partnership in that way. But by letting your audience or your target audience inform your marketing strategy, you can actually save a lot of time and energy and not spin your wheels feeling like you have to do everything under the sun or everything that you're seeing every other person doing. But I think the second recommendation that I would make, as we mentioned, is really to test things always. I like to say that there should be no ego in marketing. Although I'm a marketing lead, I never consider myself a marketing expert. I'm always a student. Algorithms, social media platforms, all of this stuff is constantly changing. And so if you make this assumption that you do marketing strategy planning and it's done, you're destined for failure. People's desires, needs, preferences are always changing. And so we want to make sure that we're responsive to that. We do recommend that folks take a look at things like analytics if you have a website. Again, ongoing customer surveys, constantly asking those questions and putting out hypotheses like, hey, we're doing social media. Is this really resonating and like driving the results that we wanted to see? Or, hey, our customers have been telling us that this product's no longer serving their needs. Can we actually bring this back to our overall business design? Marketing is actually the closest that you are to your customer. And so it's a really great way to get some of that like feedback and learning that you can pass to the rest of the organization. How'd that land for you?
I like that last piece. The marketing is the closest you are to the customer. Right.
Yeah.
So there's, again, it's about like relationship and contact. And from that approach, it's like there's real like care and concern. And one of the mistakes that I see a lot or hear about is like, oh, well, I'm supposed to do this. Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have to get a website up. And it's like, do you? do you have to? Like, I love that kind of questioning. And then, you know, what you're saying of like being really curious about, okay, this is a specific market. Are they on a certain social channel? Do they care? Maybe they don't at all. And so we can skip that whole thing, which can be a huge time suck and energy and, you know, trying to keep up with the trends and all that stuff. Well, if that's not what our community is looking into, then we don't need to do that. So there's almost like a relief there of, you know, there's so much out there, so many channels. So we don't have to do them all if that's not where we're connecting with our community, right?
Is this whole conversation just going to be a deep sigh of relief? Because I feel like people need that.
Of course. Well, yeah. Even when just, you know, if they look at the title of this and then click through to listen, you know, they might have been feeling anxious already of like, oh no, marketing. I don't want to do that.
Well, I hope you know you don't have to do it all, but actually, good segue. I do want to spend a little bit of time. So we talk about in the MBA these kind of zones of marketing activity. We talk about word of mouth, partnerships, social media and PR, and advertising. I was wondering if you could kind of briefly touch on those and how we frame them for next economy organizations.
Yeah, thanks for referencing this. And I'm trying to, for our listeners, paint the picture because we show a nice chart. So if you think of zones like a bullseye target, right, with the one zone in the center and then rings around it, concentric circles around it. And so, you know, this is based on our direct experience rather than like a marketing philosophy or something. So we've worked with, I don't know, what is it, 300 plus, you know, social enterprises, B Corps, small, you know, values-driven teams. And so this pattern holds across all of them. So right in the middle, that bullseye of the zone, that zone one. So it implies it's the most effective and the lowest cost. And so we call that word of mouth. And I'll say a little bit more about that because and certainly folks have heard of word of mouth, but it might be different to think of it as a campaign or as like an actual business marketing strategy. But that's, again, with like the good news and the relief is like, wow, that can be like the center of my marketing campaign is just like talking to the people that I'm in relationship with. Wow. Amazing. And it fits with the relationship building and the listening. And so that's what we've seen is where we get the best results. And it's not no cost. It does take your time, but there's not a big, for example, we're not spending money on advertising. We're not hiring other people. So there's not a huge cash outlay. It's just time. But again, what we see is for the amount of time, we're getting by far the biggest return on investment or ROI. I feel like that's business, throwing around some business terms here. So I'll kind of paint the picture and then maybe you can help fill in color here. So word of mouth's in the center, and then one ring out would be strategic partnerships. And these are people that they might be serving the same community. They might be part of the same movement. For example, if we're a food provider, it could be part of the food systems. And so again, that's maybe a little bit more work of building that partnership. It might be a series of conversations or an ongoing relationship rather than like a kind of a shorter interview. But again, because they're in that same industry, they might be in our supply chain. They might have a different niche in the same marketplace as us. But again, we're getting that return on investment for just our time again. So it's not a big expense. So then another layer out, this was where we would see social media or PR, where it does take a lot of time. There is cash invested and it's a little bit less effective. Not out of consideration and not effective at all, but maybe less. And then the last ring out is just paid advertising. And because that's again, we were saying at the top of the call, it's like people have that kind of allergy around paid advertising. They kind of get it that, hey, you just paid to put this in front of me and I'm less likely to use it. So then that becomes the most expensive tactic and the least return. And so we're not saying don't use the outer rings, but consider them as a whole and then choose your investment. So what would you say, Jeanette? Would you add anything to that framework?
Yeah.
We call it marketing activity zones.
Marketing activity zones. I like that. I like a zone. I love a good zone. No, I think that was really well put. But yeah, I think to our conversation, when people are just starting out in marketing, one of the first things that they think they need to do is run a campaign on Facebook or Google. And again, you're competing with billions of messages for people that you don't know who are most likely not going to see or interact with you. And yeah, I would say to the point of the smaller zones around word of mouth and partnerships, that does take a lot more time and intention. These are often people you know and people that you're in relationship with. So you putting out an email that says, we need you to buy this thing or sign up for this isn't really going to work. You have to spend that time and put in that time relationally. But as we see, again, most often these are the folks who are going to be willing to be in relationship with you, willing to provide you that feedback, and really willing to like help inform how to broaden that community. So something that I like to do when we do our persona interviews is actually talk to an existing customer and see, what other things are you reading? Where are you getting information from? What do you like to do in your free time? And sometimes asking those questions can help find that adjacent person. In marketing jargon, they typically call it a lookalike audience. So someone who may not be a core customer, but is, in that similar season of life. And so again, just asking the people who already know you, already believe in you, and trying to parse out some of those additional threads also helps to widen that circle.
You said persona. Can you define that?
Yeah. So a persona is something that we use in marketing. It would be a fictional representation of your target customer. And so when we like to put together a persona, let's go back to this tea that you were drinking, Shawn. So we might think about a couple of different audiences for that. Maybe you're someone, works from home, loves to have just like tea with your coffee. Maybe there's a family, or maybe there's like a coffee shop that's looking for tea to carry in their coffee shop. So those might be two different personas, this individual customer, but also maybe this small retailer who would be interested. And so when we put together personas, we like to, again, have conversations with real life people. So I probably would have a chat with you, Shawn, and learn about your tea drinking habits and maybe a couple of your friends who also drink tea. again, learn what's important to you when making those decisions. And then, yeah, I would probably go to a couple coffee shops that maybe carry something similar. Again, see what they need. And sometimes it always doesn't turn into a direct sales or marketing relationship, but that information, again, is super valuable because, again, I'm not making assumptions about what I think people need. I'm actually hearing from them directly and can be responsive to that.
But I like it with this listening and relationship-based approach to marketing, because now we kind of have this persona that we're thinking of. When we're creating our products, when we're creating our campaigns, we're actually thinking of them as a real, I know you said you're fictional, but they're actually based on real people. So there's this empathic connection, right?
Yeah, they really become, I would say, the North Star for all the things that we do. So if you're writing an email or you've got something on the website, I'm really placing myself in the shoes of that person. How am I going to feel when I come to this website? Am I going to get the information that I need? Do I feel like I can trust these people? And how do I know that? So again, it removes the ego out of it and actually gets you a lot closer to that person that you're trying to serve or connect with.
What would you say, why is word of mouth the most effective and lowest cost zone to pursue?
I think you said it pretty well, but I can just reiterate that again, these are the people who are closest to you. They're the people who know you the best. It's the least barrier to entry or trust to enter into relationship with you. And again, people around them. Again, I think that most of us, or at least me, I'm not a very research oriented person. So if I have to buy something or have to work with someone, I'm most often talking to my friends, people I know who see the world in a similar way. We share some of those shared values. So if I'm making a decision, I'm typically looking for advice in a close network, because again, those are the people who are putting in the time every single day versus this 30-second ad with a company that you have no relationship with. Again, there's this, emotional and relational connection that we'll talk about a little bit later that I think really lands with that word of mouth audience. And same thing with strategic partners, folks who are, again, either have a same shared dilemma, maybe shared values. Maybe they're also really passionate about local community and solving problems there. And again, you're coming from some kind of shared language. There's not as much to bridge the gap between two essentially strangers in a digital universe trying to have that conversation. You have something in common. And I think that you can do this with channels like social media. There are brands that are really effective at building brand community. I think a lot of the B Corp brands do this really well. But again, it's this conversation around, hey, we're actually not just going to use our social media to message to you every single second that you need to buy this thing, but we're going to spotlight vendors that we work with. We're going to talk about what it means to be a sustainable organization. We're going to show you how we're moving the needle forward on things that you told us were important. So people can use things like social media to create that. But again, that's not your first touch. That's after you've already established some trust and credibility with your customers.
So are you saying that some of the digital tools could be part of a word of mouth campaign?
Yeah, I definitely think so. We can use things like email and having folks reach out via social media to get word of mouth out. I would say that those are tools in our toolbox, but we really need to be thinking about, again, the intentionality behind it. So you running a social media campaign to a ton of people that you don't know is going to be much less effective than maybe asking 5 to 10 people in your network to maybe share something with their close community or inviting a couple of friends through their social media channel to be in community with you. So again, it's all about that proximity towards your core customer audience.
I just want to say, again, it's refreshing to hear kind of this actual known relationship, but there's almost a way that it's surprising with the sensationalism of all the digital tools and all the noise out there that the actual person is a much more valuable resource, right, than all the noise. It's kind of reassuring, right?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, we're all just looking to form genuine connections and trust, and that's much easier to do with the people that we know and spend time in relationship with. And I think brands would be well served if they, again, thought of this less as an extractive relationship, or I'm going to tell you what you need or what to do, but I actually do want to enter into relationship with you. Because again, at the end of the day, businesses are people behind them and like trying to solve this problem. And it can be really difficult once you get to marketing. You know, companies who have a really good intention or start from the get-go immediately feel like they have to play like every other brand or company out there. And it's actually like you would be better served, and I actually think stand out from the crowd if you spent more time being really intentional and thoughtful in the way that you approached things like marketing.
Okay, so we've done our strategy. We're doing our testing. We're using the zones. We're doing word of mouth. We're doing partnerships. We're doing maybe a little social media, a little bit of advertising. But we're kind of testing and iterating on all those, right? Getting feedback, building on what works. We're learning from what doesn't work, but not necessarily continuing to do that. So what about messaging? What do we mean when we talk about messaging? And how does that fit into this whole realm of marketing?
Yeah, so I think some of the nuance around messaging, if we talk about those zones like word of mouth and social media and advertising is how we deliver the information, then messaging is actually what we're saying. And this is where I really, again, feel like there's a bigger layer of responsibility as marketers because of the stories that we tell and the messaging that we put out into the world. So as I mentioned at the top of our conversation, the business as usual economy relies on this messaging around this idea of scarcity. There's trillions of dollars spent in this idea that you have to have this exclusive bag that was created. And there are companies that are well known to burn dead stock to create this idea of exclusivity. And we have this whole idea that there's not enough food for all of us when we know that millions of pounds of food go to waste each year. And so when we perpetuate these ideas or these narratives that we're not enough, there's not enough for all of us to meet our basic needs, our lives are incomplete if we don't make this purchase or belong to this club or have this kind of lifestyle, it is perpetuating this underlying anxiety that we all feel. And then for businesses, it's really easy to not want to engage in things like strategic partnerships because it's like, I have to say that I'm the best and better than the competition, when in reality, we actually need all of our talents and all of our contributions to be able to solve some of these things that we're facing and to meet these basic needs. And so if anyone takes anything from this conversation, it's realize the responsibility that we all have in the stories that we tell, because it's not even necessarily you're bad at marketing, but the way that you're speaking existence to the world is actually really important and keeps me up at night. Yeah, I try to be really conscientious with that. But when it comes to messaging for next economy organizations, I'd like to think about blending it, if we're not trying to do the scarcity-based marketing, really from a blend of both a factual and an emotional perspective. So factual would be in the most transparent and direct way possible, providing information about a product or a service and how it might benefit the user. So it's answering the question, what problem is being solved? So again, not to come back to tea. It's a tea day, but this is our tea. This is the blend that it has. Here's where it was grown. Here are the ingredients, and just like letting people know in a really upfront way. Again, not trying to shadow anything. Like, here's who we are and what we're doing and maybe why I started the company. But it's also important to know that there is an emotional element to messaging as well. Human beings are fundamentally emotional creatures, and that's a good thing. We're driven by both facts and emotions. So that messaging needs to come with a certain amount of empathy. You might explore questions like, how would it feel if the product I had was able to solve your problem? Like, what would that look like? For tea, it might just be, what's your morning tea ritual look like? How does that feel? Do you feel relaxed? Like, is it giving you the energy you need to go through your day? And actually, again, placing people in that context where it's like, I have the information that I need, but I also know that this person kind of understands my experience. Marketers, as usual, in the business as usual economy, can use emotional tactics to manipulate. And so we're certainly not advocating for that. But again, just like understanding both of those lenses to the human psyche and using those from a place of empathy and alignment and not manipulation is really important. Any thoughts there?
Yes.
How'd that make you feel? Relaxed?
Yes, thank you. And I'm also reflecting on like there can be an overcorrection. I know I had this being in business and having that kind of allergy to marketing and messaging, whereas the overcorrection is like, this is just the facts. Like, look, it's here. This is just what it does. And we're not padding the numbers, and it's just honest. And the thing that you miss, like you said, is that authentic emotion that is part of being human. And so not used in a manipulative way, but just how does it actually feel if, the tea's healthier and I'm detoxing and energized at the same time? Or, hey, it feels good. It's like, wow. It's a relief. I feel better. This is, not trying to oversell it, right? And be manipulative. And I really appreciate that kind of, that morality as kind of like a starting point. Look, if you're in here trying to like manipulate and convince people that they need something they don't, hard stop. Like, get lost. Like, not interested, because we're not going to build authentic relationships, right? That's not an authentic relationship if you just want the transaction, and you don't want to hear if it actually made my life better.
Definitely. Do you feel like there is maybe an example that you can think of from a next economy organization that's kind of doing both of those things really well?
Yeah, we were talking about this before. I mean, I wish I knew more, and maybe I need to kind of expose myself to to more marketing and messaging. But the example that came up is a company that we know called Our Table Cooperative. They're near you in Oregon, and they have this campaign so they're a multi-stakeholder cooperative. They own the farm, but then they also have a grocery, and then you can also be a consumer owner of the grocery, and then they also have producer owners that are the local manufacturers of different products that are sold at the grocery. So it has this nice kind of integrated food system. And I think for them, it is a little bit of a challenge because it's a big picture vision of redesigning food systems. And so that's maybe a big message or a complicated message. And then there's different groups, right? If you look at the farmer, the worker owners, the producer owners. So the campaign I'm thinking of is they had a campaign called Why I'm a Member campaign, and it was the consumer owner members of the grocery. And so it was just very authentic. It would be a photo of the person and a short quote about why they're a member. And here's some of them. Our table has been an inspiration towards our organic, healthy eating. And we enjoy the social aspect too. They have brunches and dinners and meeting the staff and the chef and the other members. And it's a great addition to our neighborhood. So it kind of lands with me of like, oh, here's this woman. She lives there. She looks like a, nice, friendly neighbor person, and this is why she goes there. So it's factual. She's getting this, healthy food and fresh. There's a social aspect, but then also how does it feel to kind of be part of that community? So it kind of blends both those, and it's very kind of humanizing and relational.
Yeah, it feels very close. This is not a celebrity influencer endorsement, which again feels so far removed from reality for most of us. Like we could see ourselves in that story. I think that's really powerful.
So, question for you, Jeanette. How do we know what kind of messaging will work for our specific brand if I have a, specific company, as opposed to kind of, we're talking a lot of general things, but how do we zoom in on a specific company and how they should message?
Yeah, so it's kind of this interesting blend. I know that we've talked a lot about just kind of rooting ourselves in the experience of our customers or consumers. And so again, the quotes and testimonials that you share, the elements of that they were sharing really could work in messaging. So if you're talking with different audience members and you're hearing these certain words or phrases come up, you know that this is the value that people see in you that you might not see in yourself. So putting yourself in your customer's shoes, understanding what they need from you, things that they're experiencing, and framing your offering or language in a way that resonates with them is a really great way to do that. At the same time, though, I do think that people who start organizations or businesses have their own set of values, their own shared story. And sometimes we don't always do that enough. We can focus too much on the product or the benefit. And we have folks that have really powerful stories for, why they have started a business. I know we talk a lot about Red Bay Coffee, another organization that's featured in our next coming MBA book, and we got to visit last week. But reframing and reclaiming coffee culture in more of like a historical context is so powerful. And so I think showing up authentically for like, here's who we are, here's our vision for the world and the way that we see things, and making sure you're also including that in your messaging. Again, if people know you and the things that you value and the way that you see the world, and furthermore, you invite them to be part of that by being in relationship with you, I think that can also be really powerful. So don't forget to include yourself maybe in that core audience and ask some of those big picture questions and really paint the picture and tell the story about why you're here and why you're doing what you're doing.
I guess my comment I would add here is just like both and, like both being really curious and listening to the customers and telling the story. Because, one of the overcorrections I've seen is kind of the fearless entrepreneur of like being so headstrong about their idea that they're not, they're not getting enough feedback. It's more about my story rather than that real relational and connecting. And, we're talking about messaging. So like, part of the message is even using the language, the vernacular that particular community would use, as opposed to maybe my own. Maybe I'm coming from the city to a rural environment and I'm talking very kind of urban and modern, and I need to get a little more folksy and down to the grassroots.
Yeah.
And so that both and, because to your point, it's like we don't want to pretend that we're not people too, but we're in this together. So this kind of, there's a community there.
Yeah, I think I think a lot about shared vision and shared dilemmas. So what brought me to like this conversation, what brought me to like wanting to start the solution, and how is that landing with other people? And so again, thinking about words, phrases, topics, ideas that you have, figuring out what's also landing with your community and figuring out how to build kind of that like shared vision and using that as the foundation for your messaging, I think rings much more authentic.
Well, maybe as we move to close here, you mentioned storytelling, but how else could storytelling fit in? Or maybe what are some more examples of, outside of just this factual and emotional messaging? How would you go about kind of bringing the story into the marketing message?
Such a good question. I do think that marketing and messaging fundamentally is the stories that we tell about the world around us, the stories that we tell about each other, the stories that we tell about the possibilities and the future that we want to speak into existence. So again, in all of our marketing, we have a responsibility. Are we going to tell this story where there's not enough for all of us and we have to compete for these scarce resources and we have to prove that we're better or smarter or cheaper or more effective than everyone else? I think we're all tired of that story. There is this invitation to tell the story of like, hey, we see this world where it's possible, where all of us get our needs met. And we really do believe that this can take place in local community. And we're here, and here's how we want to invite you in. And we want to be responsive and adaptive to your needs. And like even phrases like that subliminally and like however you communicate that in your marketing strategy, I think there's this underlying current and people can really feel it and sense it. I was just saw a post from our friends at Allbirds. They obviously do a lot of work in sustainability, and I think Crocs had just announced that they had delayed their net zero goal by a couple years. And someone from their company was like, please come to us. Like, we have no secrets. We actually realize that it's important for all of us to get on board to work towards sustainability. And it's more important for us to share the knowledge that we have than to position ourselves as the best shoes. And it's like, for me, I don't think of Allbirds really in the sense of like, oh, they're the most comfortable, the best shoes, or the brand proposition, or whatever specs that one might think that you assume in marketing. It's like, I remember the fact that they are committed to this work and they're inviting other people in. And that's the kind of marketing that you can't pay for. And so, again, I would really encourage folks that are thinking about marketing in this lens, like there is a responsibility to know your value proposition and your core customer and get things like your messaging and zones as dialed in as possible. But at the end of the day, this openness and collaboration and like speaking this next economy into existence and tossing away this idea of scarcity and competition is the moral responsibility that I think all of us have, but particularly marketers. So I could go on about that for days. Maybe it's best to end there.
I love it. Well, I just want to appreciate the context and the bigger picture story that you might be talking about a cup of tea or a sneaker or something, kind of a small product, but that it's nested in this vision of collective liberation, right? And we don't have to go on and on about the problem statement. People get it. It's not really working out for anybody right now. Even the wealthy people aren't necessarily happy, right? So, nesting the story of the particular product or service offering in this bigger picture vision of an economy that works for all life. And the story of the journey to get there, right? It's not like we want to just snap our fingers and be in utopia. There's work to be done here, and that's part of the journey. But building that connectivity, that relation, and this hopeful vision, right? We refer in the training that it's a crisis of imagination to think that there aren't possibilities when in fact there's abundant possibilities. There's so many better ways that we can meet our needs. And so weaving that into the storytelling is, to me, that's very, very hopeful and attractive, as opposed to the kind of icky repel vibes from a lot of business as usual marketing. So thank you. Anything else we should leave our listeners with to wrap up our Marketing One approach and messaging?
I think it feels complete. I would say, take a deep breath. You don't have to do it all, and know your audience and invite them in to co-create whatever you're doing. That should be marketing in a nutshell. I think we make it more complicated, but at the end of the day, it's building relationships and being authentic to the story you're trying to tell.
Well, thanks, Jeanette, and thanks all of our listeners.
Thanks, Shawn.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lyft Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Hi, Next Economy Now listeners. Erin here from the Lyft team. Have you ever asked yourself, how do I live an abundant life in integrity with the massive ecological and social crises facing our world? How do I feed myself, achieve personal security, meet my material needs, all while keeping in alignment with my values and working to build a world where others are able to get their needs met too? If so, we designed Next Economy Living for you. On June 9th, we'll be hosting our first ever Next Economy Living event. It's designed to be a conversation around how this journey of deepening personal security and resilience practices is deeply in harmony with a vision for a more just world. In this free 90-minute conversation, we'll discuss living minimally, saving resources collectively, and building food security block by block. You'll walk away with resources and templates to take the next step on your own journey, and a group of compassionate fellow learners to encourage you along the way. Are you ready to join us? Sign up today at bit.ly/nexteconomyliving.